Hi guys, this is Rita, and today it is very honored to invite our LPL English caster Ox to join our interview because I know that Ox it is pretty busy for the EU Master right now, so I'm very grateful that Ox can still join us with the interview about the upcoming world tournaments. So Ox it is our English caster right now, and he also joined LPL since last summer, and then this year he makes a very huge step up. He also casted and become the analyst in these MSI tournaments, and I'm pretty sure that in our Chinese forum, even though for some video platform, we all see that how Ox expressed his love to Gala in these MSI tournaments. So, first of all, can I invite like Ox to say hello to our Chinese audience?
Hey, everyone. Yeah, I mean, really did a great explanation, but I've completely fallen in love with the LPL since I've been casting it, and seeing all the warm reception on that gala clip when people sent me clips from Chinese social media, it was really nice to see. So thank you for the support.
Yes. Okay, so for the first question, so probably for some Chinese audience, they only watch the Chinese casting. Maybe they didn't know you a lot. So the first question I would like to ask you. So how did you get into LPL, and what kind of opportunity that make you become a LPL caster last summer?
So initially, LPL was looking for guest casters in the color role. So it was basically just I'd been working on the Northern League Championship in the ERLs, which feeds into EU Masters. So that's essentially a bit similar to like the LDL, in the sense that it's like the second division for Europe. And I was really keen when I got the opportunity. There was a few guest casters who came in last summer. And I mean, I completely fell in love with the LPL. The gameplay is so fantastic. Being able to cast world champions. I remember casting Jackie Love in that summer and being like, wow, I am casting a world champion right now, which was just crazy. Obviously, I think it's something that if you focus on the LPL, there's so many world champions, there's so many fantastic players, but it's really such a unique thing, right? Most other regions don't have that many just world champion players, which is insane. And then I fortunately did a good enough job. My co-workers were really impressed with me, and they decided to bring me on full time for the next year, which obviously I was super keen to do. And then, yeah, since then I've been working full time on the league.
Yes, definitely. You just mentioned about that. Actually, LPL like already won three titles for the Worlds, and also like RNG also won like three times for the MSI, and then also kind of people will think about for this year LPL four representative are really crazy because like EDG the last year world champion it is the first seed, and then the MSI champion it is the seed four. So that's why maybe for other region, especially kind of the LCK region, they will think that the overall performance of the LPL this year it is really strong. So like in your opinion as a caster, so why people will think like LPL looks so scared this year?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it's the fact that we have the former world champion in EDG, and then we have the MSI champion in RNG, and the fact that RNG nearly didn't make it because there has never once be a situation where the MSI champion hasn't made the following worlds, and RNG was so close to not making it, which kind of just the reason that obviously happens is because if you're the best team in the world in spring, it's very likely you'll be good in summer. But the LPL is so competitive that even when RNG are still a strong team, like there's so much competition. It's so hard to guarantee a world slot. I feel like it goes without saying, compared to any other region, LPL is by far the hardest to make it to worlds. And it's a fact that EDG and RNG, obviously made it through the regional gauntlet. But I think Top Esports and JDG are just on a complete another level, right? I think these teams are so fantastically good. We saw two best of fives that went to 5 games, so they're very close in level. And personally, I don't think, if you're looking for the perspective of the regions, I don't think there's many teams. In fact, I only think there's one team that can contest top esports and JDG, and that's Gen.G. I don't even think it's like, okay, career contest. I just think it is Gen.G who can match up to them. So I think, especially because we hear lots of rumors about scrims between LCK teams and LPL teams, it definitely seems like we are sending four really stacked rosters to Worlds right now.
So, yeah, like you also mentioned about the big enemy for LPL probably this year it is Gen.G. But before asking the biggest enemy for us this year, I would like to ask you, like for example, bring more detail about what kind of strengthen for the LPL right now. Because when we watch the payoff. Like for example, we can realize that JDG and TES they are kind of higher standard, or like compare with EDG and RNG, they looks much better. So in your opinion, like and also like for some caster, they will put like JDG and TES like the tier team, but while they think about like EDG and RNG, probably these two teams are not stronger compared with these two teams. So what do you think about this kind of order?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that order. Personally, regarding Top Esports and JDG, I think that Top Esports had some underperformances in the playoffs. I think Knight wasn't playing as well as we typically expect from him. I think that the potential of Top Esports is really high, right? When you see them playing at their absolute best, I think they are the best team in the world. But we saw some inconsistencies. I think in the comparison for JDG, right? I feel like everyone on JDG played at a very good level during playoffs. 369 has been fantastic for the entire split. Kanavi as well, but like Yugao, I think was the strongest mid laner in playoffs, which is a really hard accolade to give, considering we have players like Knight, like Scout, like Xiaohu, and obviously Rookie as well. It's very hard to be the best mid lane out of those, but Yugao had the best performance, and Hope and Missing were fantastic, particularly Missing. So I think JDG were at their best in playoffs. Which, if they continue that form in the Worlds, I do think they're the favourites. I think they're the strongest team. But if we're assuming they were at their best in playoffs, if they aren't quite at that level, I think Top Esports could have an edge. But I think those two are obviously very close. For the other two, for EDG, my concern with EDG is the fact that we saw them struggle, throughout this year. They came off being world champions. Expectations were huge, especially since they kept the same roster. But I personally feel like part of the reason they came into such a strong position at the end of the split was the meta shift, right? We went into this hyper carry meta where we had picks like Zeri and Sivir. We had the Enchanter supports, Yumi for Mako. Viper on these hyper carries is insane. Such a good AD carry player. And as well, like things like Azir being meta for Scout were really fantastic. So I think all of these came together to give a really good meta for EDG. And so as a result, I think that's why they were able to get our spot as the third seed. Going into Worlds, a lot of these champions have been shifted, been changed, so we could see them maybe suffer from that. Whereas on the other side of the coin, RNG obviously came in as a 4 seed, but you have to remember they were pretty close to taking down EDG, and also I think the meta did not suit them, right? I think as much as Xiaohu is fine on these control mages, I think RNG look best when we see him on things like the Galio, the Lissandra, these active mid laners that we saw in spring for him to roam with. In the support role, Ming, again, I think he's a good Enchanter player, but I think RNG are best when he's on primary engage, when he's playing like his Nautilus, things like Leona. And so for me, I think the meta wasn't good for RNG, and they still made it to Worlds. So we've seen a lot of changes between now and the Worlds patch. I think it could really benefit RNG, and they may come in as our third strongest team, but it really just depends where the meta ends up landing.
Yes, but I am going to like challenge you a little bit. So, in your opinion, like for example, the four LPL representative. So, what kind of order in your mind, like when you need to order these four teams?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm a bit biased, okay? For anyone who doesn't know, I'm a bit biased towards Top Esports. Wayward is my favorite player. I just think his emote usage is completely fantastic. So I put Top Esports first, but also from an analytical point of view, I think their potential is really high. I think when these players are all playing at their best, I think Tian is the best jungler in the world. I think Jackie Love is the best AD carry in the world. I think Knight underperformed a bit during playoffs, but we know what his potential can be. So my expectations is sky high for them. I put JDG in second, but I think it's easy to interchange those two. They're so close. And then I actually kind of feel like RNG might be third. I do think that out of playoffs, it was clear that EDG were the third best team from the LPL. But I think with the meta potentially shifting, I think EDG might suffer. And I still think RNG are a fantastic team. I think if RNG get even slightly the right meta for them, or just a few changes to push away, I think they could really make a strong run. And for me, they're kind of the dark horse of the LPL.
Yes, it is pretty obvious you think like TN and then the whole TES, it is kind of your favorite players. But I would like to ask you another question. Maybe like for some LPL players, they are pretty underrated for the Western community. I would like to ask you, kind of you cast a lot of game this year, and then as a caster, if I would like to ask you to introduce some pretty potential LPL rookies or the players who are underrated in the Western community, who will you like introduce to them?
I feel like if we're talking in the whole league, uh, I'm trying to think. I mean, I think there's a lot of rookies that, people have been really high on. Players like GEN.G, players, well, not so much rookies, but players like Shun as well, who have been really impressive, and that a lot of people are big fans of. I feel like it's kind of tricky because it depends on like Western sentiment. I think well, one for me, and it's not even like a sort of new and upcoming player, is Jackie Love. And that sounds weird to say that Jackie Love is underrated, but I think a lot of people in the Western community, like not everyone watched all of LPL. Not everyone even watched all the playoffs. A lot of people just watched the finals and they saw that game five play and they were like, "Oh my God, Jackie Love, massive misplay." I saw a lot of sentiment on things like Reddit where people were like, "Oh, Jackie Love completely entered the series," and I'm like, I feel like that's so harsh on Jackie Love because I think he's had so many fantastic plays. And sure, Jackie Love is a player who will test limits. I'm not denying that. He is a player kind of similar to the Shy, his old teammate, where he will look for these opportunities to make big plays and they sometimes backfire. But I think he's the best mechanical player in the world. And I think he looks for windows to win the game where other players wouldn't. I think he plays AD carry in a completely different way to players like Viper. Like Viper is a fantastic AD carry, and for me, second best in the world. But I also think Jackie Love has this killer instinct where he will look for so many windows to, find the biggest potential play to get back in. So in terms of someone who I think is underrated who's going to Worlds, I think Jackie Love is definitely one of them. As for players in the league in general, I feel like one thing for me was probably anyone's legend, like as a whole, the roster. So I was a pretty big believer of them in making playoffs, and they unfortunately didn't just. But a lot of people in the West had pretty low expectations of this team. Like, oh, AL's only making a high because they had an early schedule to start the split. But it was actually some of the stuff I saw during spring. There was this series against EDG where AL had this like insane engage, and it was down to their solo laners, right? It was down to ZDZ and Forge, and even in spring, normally people when they talked about AL, they talked about Betty and Chocho, but ZDZ and Forge, both of them were approaching on a flank. ZDZ was on Camille, Forge was on LeBlanc. They both had a control ward, set up this flank beautifully, and you saw them dive in. It's like pixel perfect. If you pause at the moment where they both dash in, it's like at the exact same time. And they dive onto Viper and Scout, and Scout gets instantly deleted because ZDZ ults him on Camille and he's on Ari. And then Forge and LeBlanc chunks out Viper, and they win the team fight off the back of that. And they were even in gold as well. It was like an even state of the game. And that's kind of what made me fall in love with AL. I just feel like their ability to team fight is so good. And I'm not gonna lie, they're definitely a team with issues, right? We've seen them struggle to contest in the early game. But I just think like out of all the teams, AL is such a treat to watch in team fights, and the way they work together is fantastic. So for me, I think AL are pretty underrated. I think if they manage to rectify some of their issues in the early game, they could be a really scary team to go up against.
Yes, actually, you bring out a pretty good point that like in during the recently we can see like some LPL's rookie really pop off, not especially in our own region, even though in the world champion. Yeah, for example, like your favorite player, like Weiwo, probably many people have a very such high expectation for him. Like when we like saw the Twitter post about the top 20 or like the top 5 of each role, we saw many casters are very favorable of these players. So I would like to ask you about the reason why like LPL, of course it is very competitive this year compared for the previous year, and also kind of why LPLs like the rookie always can have a very high expectation not only for our own region, but also for the Western community. They also have very high expectation for those kind of rookie.
So I think a big thing is that there's so much depth in the LPL, right? There's so many teams in the LPL, but also so many teams in the LDL. So often when you see a rookie come up to the LPL, they actually have a lot of experience playing competitive games, right? You know, it's not like we've just got them fresh out of solo queue. And I think you see that they integrate very well. I think for the most part, LPL teams do a great job of introducing these rookie players to the roster. But also, like by the time you get to Worlds, if you think about Wayward, he's played a full split with Top Esports for summer. He played most of the split in spring for Top Esports. And if you compare a rookie from the LPL to, you know, the LEC, think how many more games they play in the LPL because it's best of three, right? So even though it's only been 1 year for Wayward, he's played the equivalent of like 2, 3 years in the LEC, which, you know, basically makes him almost a veteran, right, in comparison. And I think because you get so much experience, so much time playing, and you're playing against such good players, it really allows you to really catch up quite quickly. And sure, Wayward definitely had a good start when he came onto the team, but you've definitely seen him develop over the time. And I think it just makes such a difference, right? So much good competition, so many games played, and teams doing a fantastic job. And it just means, you know, when we get these talented rookies, they're really fostered and allowed to grow. And it's just fantastic to see, especially, you know, as you said, Wayward is my favorite player. Seeing him go to Worlds for his first World, I'm so happy for him.
Yes, and you have mentioned about how the numbers of games. So actually, for the group stage and also the play-in stage, like the region will play in the best of one. So probably for some LPL audience, they will worry about probably best of one. It is not our regions, like the very favorable format seems to be play the best of three for the whole time. Maybe it is a little bit benefits for the LEC team or the NA team who plays like the best of one for their regular speed. So kind of in your opinion, do you think like the format will affect a little bit, or what kind of like kind reminders you can give for the LPL team?
I think that it definitely does give an edge to the other regions, and we've seen that before, right? Often we'll see LPL teams sometimes underperform in group stage. FPX last year is a great example, but obviously they were a team with a lot of internal struggles beyond just what we saw on the Rift. I do think, though, the four representatives we're sending, I think Top Esports and JDG are too strong to struggle in group stages. I think a lot of people look at Top Esports as a volatile team because there's, you know, when they're playing at their best, they are the best in the world. When they're playing, you know, with some players underperforming, they can struggle. I think they're just too good. I think the term is hand stiff, right? They're just too mechanically good. I think they'll just outmatch every team in groups. Maybe they drop a game, but I don't think they'll ever not make it out. And normally we look to the lower seeds, right? We look to the third and fourth seed as, you know, potentially teams where they could struggle. But RNG, you know, we saw them at MSI, right, coming out of the group stage and the Rumble stage with a fantastic performance. RNG feel like to me a very refined team. They have a good understanding of how to play out the game, and as much as they struggled with the summer meta, I think it's very unlikely that they'll end up bombing out in groups. And then the other one is EDG, and I think EDG are, you know, a team who are maybe a bit more controlled in their approach to the game as well. You know, they often lean into team fights. I feel like even if a team gets an early lead, which can often be a big way, right? You have an upset is in a best of one. If there's mistakes in the early game and one team gets like 5,000 gold ahead, that can be a win. I don't think that's a guarantee against EDG because even if you're 5,000 gold ahead, their team fighting is so good, right? As long as Viper gets to the point where he has some items, he will carry. So I think, you know, it's easy to say beforehand because I'm sure everyone looked at last year and said, no, FPX are going to be completely fine. And then obviously they weren't. But I feel like this year I'm more confident than ever that all four seeds will make it out of groups. I think they all look very consistent. So I can understand the concern, I can understand the worry, but I think we've sent, you know, our lower seeds are very consistent and our higher seeds are just too good.
Yes, I think I think not only about the mechanics. Our player probably is the strongest year for our region. And other thing I would like to bring it for the discussion is about the meta change, because we can. I'm not sure whether you started to play the new patch already or not. Yeah, and because we noticed, like for example, we when we like review the like the patch change, we noticed like for the AD carries champion, of course it is got nerfed for pretty much, and then So, in your opinion, I would like to ask you if you kind of predict for this patch, which champion probably it is very high tier, like high priority for pick.
Yeah, I think for me, I think Aatrox is still like Aatrox wasn't nerfed, and that champion is just insane. So for top lane, I think Aatrox is the best pick in the game. For the jungle, we've had a lot of junglers nerfed. Like Poppy's clear speed was nerfed, Trundle's W was nerfed, Wukong had some nerfs to his movement speed and his attack speed, which actually did quite a bit. And they buffed Hecarim, and Hecarim did get a nerf again on 12-18. But on 12-17, he was the most broken champion in the game. I was banning him in solo queue all the time, and his ban rate was like ridiculous. Like I would rarely see a game because I would ban him on my team, but then often the enemy team would also ban him. Like it was such a problematic pick. So I do think the nerfs hit him a bit, but I still think Hecarim is a pick we can expect to see a decent amount in the jungle. I think AD carry wise, Misfortune got some big buffs to help her crit build, and she got a little bit of a nerf as well on 12-18. But from what I've been hearing, a lot of people still think she's really strong. So I think Caitlyn is also a pick that might come up. Maybe not as the strongest, but I think especially with a lot of the AD carries being nerfed, like Zeri nerfed, Sivir nerfed, Lucian Nami nerfed, Calista Draven got little nerfs. I think Caitlyn can be a really potent one, especially since we saw earlier this season they nerfed health potions and sustain in lane. So if you get poked out by Caitlyn Lux, it can be really problematic. And I mean, you might have even seen for any fans who watched the LEC that Comp actually played Caitlyn in the finals for Rogue and had a really strong performance. So I think potentially that's something that could show up. I think support is probably the one that's a bit trickier because a lot of people expect the Enchanter meta to have died a bit because we saw the big hyper carries nerfed in Sivir, we saw Yumi nerfed, we saw Lulu nerfed, but I don't think that nerf was that big. But I honestly think there's still space for it. I think Karma is something we could expect to see. I think Karma is a really strong blind because, if you play it into the likes of a melee support, you can just harass them down before they get a chance to engage. If you play it into an enchanter, she'll have wave priority. And then she obviously scales well with the shielding, so I think Karma's good. I think Soraka's also a strong option that we did see from Trimby in LEC finals that can also be brought out. So I think there's still space for enchanters, but I still expect to see, our typical engage supports, things like the Nautilus, things like the Amumu. So that's kind of my view there. And I think the final one to talk about is mid lane, which I think is tricky because mid lane can often be influenced heavy by what's happening on the rest of the map, right? If AD carry is strong, then you want roaming mids because you want to roam and help the AD carry. If AD carry is a bit weaker, then maybe we get more, control mages because you want the mid lane role to be strong. So I think that's the one that I think I struggle with the most, but I think something that I still think should be strong is Azir, because Azir did get nerfs, but he was just so strong during playoffs. And I think particularly for EDG or JDG fans, they'll be really happy if Azir is still strong, because obviously Yagao and Scout are the two best in the world on it.
Yeah, actually, you bring a question that like many people still like have a very huge discussion about it. It is about the play strategy for the map right now. So, cause maybe when they see the patch 12.18 at first, they will expand it. Like for example, the Jace buff and also some carrying top laner get a little bit buff for it. So probably they will expect it is a meta that maybe it is very in favor of the top mid laner and also the jungle and not focus playing on the bot side. But like for example, when you play some solo queue, probably you will have the feeling that the enchanter, like you say, it is not still very strong in a solo queue. Yes. So my question is in your opinion, so do you think it is maybe when you predict for the word strategy for each team, will you still think that the bot lane, it is still very important in these tournaments?
Yeah, I think the nerfs to the AD carries helped. I think things like Aatrox being strong, especially teams like LNG were a team who were happy to play through the top side. With things like Tarzan and Sejuani, you'd have the melee solo laners, which was quite strong. And obviously, JDG, with 369 in the top lane, are definitely a team where we saw Kanavi lean there a bit. And I think that strategy can work, but I think generally speaking, I think bot lane is still super strong. And I think, the AD carries I was talking about, Misfortune, Caitlyn, are big lane bullies. It's like if you play through bot and you get bot lane ahead, it's not just the fact that you have that lane winning. You can then rotate them up towards Herald, right? Also, having a strong bot lane means you're probably going to get dragons. And I think because they buffed the objectives, like dragons are really strong, Herald is worth extra gold when you take it. I think bot lane is still going to be the main focus. And, like I said, I think top lane and the top side of the map will have got a bit of help, but I still think bot lane is just too important right now. And I just think the fact that, often like people, I think one of the things they did is they buffed dragons and they were like, okay, we'll buff Herald, so that'll help top laners. But in reality, Herald is more impacted by which bot lane can move first. So if you have like, Misfortune plus Karma in the bot lane, you are always going to be moving first. And also they're really fast, right? Because Karma can shield for movement speed and Misfortune gets the out of combat movement speed. So if you get to Herald first, you're probably winning that Herald fight, right? So I think because of that, it's still a situation where bot lane is super important, which I think is good for teams like EDG, who have a really strong bot lane. Because I think if it did go to a top lane meta, I think they would struggle, especially against teams like JDG.
Actually, you mentioned about like only about the enchanters part. So another thing it is we all know that actually for the LPL support, they are also really good at for some engaged support. For example, Latilus. And then, in your opinion, so do you think that that kind of engaged support will still very impactful in this tournament? Because I noticed that for the how to say it for the item for the stopwatch GA and also for the Zhongya, it is you need to spend more money for buying it. Maybe for the team fight you need to delay a little bit for the time. So how do you think about this one?
Yeah, I think a lot of things have hurt engaged supports because historically, for the past few years, it has been very much these engaged supports as the meta. There's been exceptions, right? Like Yumi last year at Worlds was an exception, but for the most part, we've seen like Nautilus, Leona be these dominant picks. I do think that like Riot has really worked hard over the course of this year to change that, right? We've seen the durability change, which makes it harder for picks like Leona because they don't have enough damage to kill enchanters. We've seen like nerfs to things like health potions and second wind. So when you're in lane, it's a lot easier to harass out these melee supports. But I think the role they play in competitive is still so important because they pose a lot of threat in lane. They can be really important for team fights for starting it off, but especially if you have AD carries like Kalista, for example, or Draven, having a Nautilus can be super potent. So I still think that these picks are going to be relevant, and I still think they have a place in the meta. But I think they've obviously faced up against a lot of things that made them struggle. The stopwatch one is another one because often I think the increased cost of stopwatch isn't that bad because if supports want, they can take perfect timing and get a free one. But the problem is I think it's too expensive to convert it into a Zhonya's, so they definitely lose that element of it. I think Amumu is definitely a pick that really like to go on Zhonya's because you could buy so much time. You could queue in R, maybe queue again, Zhonya's, maybe have a queue up by the end of that. And also, it was very good against Silas, because Silas, if you Zhonya's, he couldn't steal your ultimate. But I think we'll still see these picks. And one thing they did do is they buffed Evan Shroud, which is the support mythic that increases damage to CC targets. So it wasn't a massive buff, but I definitely think that might help because I think that's the ultimate thing is that the expectation is if you're playing a champion like Leona or Nautilus and you land your full combo, the target should die. And I think the problem was with the durability patch, that was happening a little bit less. And if they survive and they can heal up, it makes it very difficult. So I think these engaged supports still have some issues they're facing, but I still expect to see them. And I still think that the LPL players, the LPL supports are so good, especially Ming. I think Ming on Nautilus is just a fantastic treat to watch. So I think he'll still be bringing it out and having good success.
Yes, actually we have already talked a lot about the patch change, and then I would like to move to the prediction of this tournament. So, if I ask you for the top 3 team in this world tournaments, maybe top 4 it is more suitable. It is I would like to know about which 4 team you think it is very high chance to at least play in the semifinals.
Yeah, I think I expect to see top esports, JDG, EDG, and GEN.G. I think based on what happened in playoffs, those are the 4 best teams in the world. Uh, it's obviously hard to compare different regions, but because LPL's historically been so strong, I think it goes without saying that Top Esports and JDG were so close, and I think those two are two of the best. I think Gen.G have also been so dominant in Korea, and by looking at their play, they do look very powerful. So, and the fact is as well as they're all in different groups, right? So I expect all four of them to top their group and then win their quarterfinal, and then it would kind of be like a reverse of 2021, where we had EDG against the three Korean teams. I expect it to be Gen.G against the three Chinese teams. And obviously, I'm hoping they don't do the same as EDG and win, but I think that's what our semifinals will probably look like. I think, maybe there's a potential that RNG pull off an upset. But I think the problem is because RNG is in the same. Well, if they get through play-ins, which I assume they will, they'll be in the same group as Gen.G. If they end up being second seed, then they could end up facing up against Top Esports or JDG, and I don't think they'd win that. But if RNG go up against EDG, I think that maybe they could actually win this time because they were very close in the regional qualifiers, and I think the meta shift favors them. So maybe there's a chance that we see RNG instead of EDG. But I think Top Esports, JDG for sure in my mind, and I think Gen.G as well. I think Gen.G is the biggest threat to the LPL right now, and if we don't win Worlds as a region, it will probably be Gen.G.
So, I would like to ask you, like which team it is your favorite to win this tournament this year?
Gotta say, Top Esports. There's a bit of analysis, but I'm also very biased, right? I love Top Esports. Whenever I see them play, I just think that there's so many fantastic players. They look for these opportunities that are really creative. I think Jackie Love is the best AD carry in the world. I think Tian has been the best jungler throughout summer. And the thing is, it's like, there's been so much competition. Viper has been fantastic in the AD carry role. Kanavi has been so good in the jungle, and yet I still think that Top Esports are the best two in those roles. I do think that Knight wasn't playing his best in playoffs, but we've seen what Knight can do. Like, we think back to last year in summer, how fantastic he was when Top Esports was struggling. So, for me, I think if this team hits their peak, I think we will see them win Worlds. They're my favorite to win it, and I think often at Worlds isn't necessarily about who's had the best year. It's about who performs the best in the tournament. And I think Top Esports are a team who have that potential to beat anyone. Also, when you think about it, right, this is a team who have had very consistent results. They were second in spring, losing 3-2. By one game, they were second. And then in summer, again, they were second by one game. They've kept a similar level of form, even though obviously RNG has dropped since spring. We've seen JDG rise since spring, EDG have risen since spring, but Top Esports have kept sort of a similar thing. So even in terms of their, inconsistencies sometimes, I still think they're a very strong team. And so for me, they're who I believe in. Obviously, I'm pretty biased towards Wayward as well because I think he's hilarious. I've seen some interviews from him, and also whenever he pops his emotes in game, he always sells me on him. So I'd love to see him have a great performance at Worlds.
Yes. So you are kind of the, how to say, a very stunned followers of the Church of Weibo.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yes. For at last, I also want you to say something like send something supportive message for all four LPL team. So, anything you would like to say to them?
I just want to say that you've all had fantastic years, right? You're all fantastic players. We've seen such great battles throughout the split through spring and summer, and I feel like this is the opportunity for you to all show what we know you can do, right? Top Esports, JDG, RNG, and EDG, all four of you are just such great teams who I know will represent the LPL well, and I just hope you have a great time, you have fun, and you show what the LPL can do. LPL fighting!
Okay, so thank you so much for accepting our interview today, and I also will put the Ox Twitter account under the camera there, I think. And then once again, thank you so much for you to joining us. And then I hope you have a good day.